Hello. I'm going to continue the discussion concerning the underlying psychology that defines each of us. Not again. Is this crap ever going to be over? Where the fuck is the bottom of this pit? Yes, we got to the bottom last time. I'm not going to belabor the concept of identity in this video. Today, I'm going to discuss mechanisms. Fear not, my friends. This is something different. Well, a little different. It's more of an extension in a different direction, but still connected. So there I was, at the Grand Canyon. You ever been to the Grand Canyon? I recommend it. I had just had a 5-hour drive to get there, and the sun was starting to redden and set. I parked and closed my door. The foot traffic was fairly light, and a small crowd of tourists clustered around the primary overlook points. I made my way down the paved path, eyeing various plants native to the local area. About 100 feet away was this stone tower, which jutted it above the foliage like an old medieval keep. Through the trees, I carefully pushed myself over the rocks and steps, and suddenly, there it was, this massive hole in the ground. It was stunning how big it feels. You can't see the whole thing in one glance. You have to pan your gaze 180 degrees to actually take it in. The depth of the thing must be experienced. You can't really see the depth of the canyon in a picture. All the people were fairly quiet, which gave everything a fairly peaceful feel. It's that same feeling you get in a new snowfall, where everything sounds deep and slightly muffled, which is weird since you'd expect to be able to hear echoes from the canyon. You can't. It's that big. A soft breeze was blowing and the temperature was cooling gradually. The sun began to dip behind the furthest peak. You could see the colors of the cliff faces, most of which was a reddish hue, start to take on a new character, almost appearing alive. A picture can capture photons, but we have many senses. You have to be there to capture the whole experience. As often happens in these circumstances, my mind starts to drift toward the subconscious. As the sun was setting, leaving a darkened scene, I start thinking about that hole we all seem to have as young adults. I remember that motivation to be a great something or other, that empty part seeking something to fill it. I often refer to it as trying to be that proverbial somebody. Perhaps the massive hole in the ground explains why I went this direction. I made my way across the stone tower to an overlook and peered down into the chasm over the handrail. From here you can see the Colorado River flowing with whitecaps in the distance. The encroaching night air had a remarkable softness to it. Cool, but not enough to cross your arms. Kind of like dropping into a bathtub of room temperature oil. Refreshing yet comforting. I stood there, breeze flipping my hair across my forehead, trying to capture the depth of this place. My mind returned to the subconscious. Understanding the concept of chains of identity, domes, the point of zero, we all tend to have an empty hole in our spirits looking for something to satisfy. Oftentimes it's a woman we are driven toward. But that is simply the object. It could be any object that we seek to fill that emptiness. The object is usually defined by our chains of identity. But why is there a hole at all? Personally, I no longer feel that empty feeling. I'm aware of it for sure, but it's more like a memory than a hunger. I wonder, where did it go? Why do I feel so satisfied? Why do I feel so at peace? Why am I perfectly content now? Was it just having the understanding of how my brain works? Well, partly. I'm going to use the word soul. Understand by using this word, I'm not referring to the spiritual entity most pastors and religious fathers sell for money. I'm referring to the totality of one's subconscious. The soul in my usage is a sense you have of yourself, that otherness that allows you to differentiate yourself from your environment. We begin life without an emptiness to be filled. In fact, our infant selves have so little awareness We can't really go beyond the direct identification of our newborn sensory organs. But as we grow, we're introduced to many things. We develop a longing to pursue things. What's out there? What happens when I drop this spaghetti on the floor? Oh my god, it falls down, and those big humans that feed me start making loud noises. That was fun. I want to do it again. Does that sound familiar, parents? It starts with simple curiosity. We want to know how things work. We want to know what is out there in the dark, the unknown, the unexplored. This basic function of our subconscious becomes overridden and redefined as we integrate into society. From a basic curiosity, our minds are steered by social norms into a certain category, generally defined by our socioeconomic station, institutions, cultural heritage, and family value systems. Eventually, our basic curiosity is molded into well-defined success objectives. We aren't pursuing things for curiosity's sake anymore. Rather, the mechanism behind curiosity has been repurposed, like a virus repurposing a cell nucleus for its own use. At some point in our development, that sense of basic curiosity is now a permanent hole that we feel must be filled in order to be satisfied and at peace. Without satisfying that emptiness, we come back as ghosts and haunt our childhood homes. Okay, not really, but we live with a longing in our spirit, never really satisfied, never really at peace. I think what's going on here is a combination of a couple basic psychological functions. Basic curiosity we've already explored, but the sex drive can't be overlooked. For women, it's their biological clocks. If we consider these functions, what are they? Where are they? There's no button that gets pushed. It's not a physical manifestation of some kind of master-slave relationship. No. It's a biological imperative hardwired into our brains to respond to certain chemicals or sensory cues at certain times in our physiological development. These biological imperatives can be understood as mandatory motivations. You have no control over their call. You will do as you're told. You have no choice in the matter. So, combine biological imperatives and a basic sense of curiosity. Combine these two. Now, understand this combination like a computer hardware component. Perhaps consider it like a firmware for the mind. Now, take that picture and imagine someone can manipulate this somehow to cause the undirected machine part to direct the computer toward a particular task. That is, I think, a plausible explanation for how this emptiness construct works on a mechanistic level. Basic biological and psychological functions we are all born with become molded, mixed together, and rewritten to match some societal norm or construct. And I think there's a very real interplay here between nature and nurture. So, back to the soul concept. Understand all these mechanisms are naturally blank slates, undefined. Biological imperatives, the subconscious mind, curiosity, these various machine parts and software are born into us as infants, but they become manipulated and directed. Throughout this process, we are lied to and confused by other humans with an agenda to make use of us in some way. I believe the Jesuits had a saying, "Give me the child and I'll give you the man." This means the Jesuits were well aware of the child's susceptibility to influence. Once they're done with indoctrination, those children, now grown up, have a subconscious defined by new chains of identity and value systems which, in turn, are defined by the dome of religion. As far as they're concerned, those religious fables are absolutely real. I think there are very physical mechanisms, as I've described above, to explain this. But we aren't Jesuit students, right? Aha! But we are all under the same spell of societal indoctrination. Can we reverse that sense of emptiness and return our subconscious to its rightful state of neutrality? Well, I believe so. First, we need a mental construct in order to clearly see what we're dealing with. Imagine, if you will, a chicken egg. It's white and hollow. Inside that hollow is a yolk which rests in a bath of liquid protein we call the egg white. This shell is pierced ever so gently, and its contents starts to flow out the bottom. Now we have a hollow egg shell. We place this on a stand. We grab another stand, set them both on a table in front of us. In our pocket is an egg-shaped piece of stainless steel, heavy, polished, and shiny. We take that piece of metal and place it on the second stand. Now, look at these two egg-shaped objects. One is empty. If you fill it up, it will be full. Almost solid, yet still in two parts. Once it's full, the contents will escape through the original hole at the bottom, and the shell will again be empty. This is kind of like what happens when we achieve our dreams. You want to be rich. Why is it that we hear so many stories of people that pursue wealth, achieve it, and then complain like little bitches about how hard life is? You heard the phrase, "mo money, mo problems"? What's up with that? Well, clearly, they've filled their souls with the riches they sought, but for some reason, they aren't satisfied. What's going on here? You have a chain of identity that led you to believe the artificial success objective we call wealth was really important. You thought wealth equals status in an ultimate sense, as if in obtaining wealth, you became that proverbial somebody. You aren't actually just getting money. You are, in fact, trying to follow the instructions of your subconscious that were programmed into you throughout your development. Now you have this soul with an empty spot that longs to be filled. Perhaps it's a woman you seek. You get a relationship and now that soul is filled. Perhaps you feel satisfied in that aspect. But certainly, you have other areas that long to be filled and made whole. What's going on here? It's an endless loop of dissatisfaction. Is there an ultimate end or permanent solution? Well, just as we returned to zero in previous videos, perhaps there's a way to achieve the original soul we were born with. Look back at the table where the steel egg rests on its stand. You notice in comparing the two eggs, the steel egg is not empty, nor full. It's a solid object. The chicken egg can be full only because it can be empty. A solid object can't be empty. Thus, the state of fullness doesn't apply to it. Imagine, if you will, that your soul is a solid object. Not empty, not full. Simply solid. That's what you're born with. As an infant, we have no sense of overarching motivation unrelated to our immediate needs and observations. We have a solid soul, so to speak. It has no emptiness or sense of ethereal longing. That is the truth. But we become convinced through various suggestive mechanisms during our development that we must seek this or that, pursue that which is really, really important, according to institutions, communities, what have you. Our society punches holes into our souls and suggests to our subconscious that we're missing something and must find it. This is not, nor has it ever been true, but we become convinced of falsehoods that don't actually exist. Marriage, for example, is imaginary. It's a fantasy of an arrangement between two people, given legitimacy and enforcement via government, and structural foundations via religious orthodoxy. We're told we won't be complete without a partner, and chained to that partner, on pain of perpetual financial enslavement. In truth, it's simply imaginary. It does not physically exist in any way whatsoever. It purely exists in the minds of the people involved. But these social institutions, such as marriage, become absolutely real and necessary as far as we can tell, through collective agreement. The collective hive mind has the same mechanisms. All these fake structures are taken for granted by the general public. That's how perception becomes reality. That's how the Mandela effect works. In effect, false realities, including chains of identity, become real to us through the interplay between the conscious and subconscious mind. As we know, our brains are capable of creating models of reality. When photons hit our retinae, That image is transmitted through our optic nerve and perceived after being processed in our brains. We don't really see. We perceive the image our brain creates to represent the image our eyes detected. In the same way, we use our brain's logic function to create an expected outcome from given starting conditions. We use our experiences from the past to inform this function. This is another way to say we are pattern seeking. Oftentimes, this pattern seeking can lie to us. We see a pattern and just roll with it. For example, it's a common thing for Christians to see images of Jesus in a burnt piece of toast or a cloud. In this case, the conscious mind informed the subconscious, and thus, a false perception was registered in the mind as real. Similarly, a grieving father hears his dead son speaking to him in a crowd. He runs desperately, straining and calling for his son, but it was an auditory hallucination. He was so sure he heard his son, but he didn't. He doesn't care. Nobody can convince him his son didn't communicate from the other side. Our hopes, dreams, and fears can also influence this function. What's happening is an interplay between our conscious and subconscious minds. If the subconscious mind agrees with something, we become convinced of the reality of the thing. For example, if I see a flash of light, I'm convinced there's a light coming from over there. I investigate, and indeed, a car just passed on a dark road. My conscious mind identified something, and my unconscious registered it as real, and thus, I'm convinced something happened as I perceived it. It turned out to be an accurate perception. This circumstance was real, whether I believed it or not, but this hardware can be hijacked. I see 5 threes on the roulette board, and am convinced, I'm certain, the next one will not be a 3. But it is. I'm confused. My subconscious was convinced of a certain outcome, but it didn't happen. Since reality didn't agree with something I'm certain of, I then decide someone must have cheated. You can see how this interplay between conscious and subconscious mental states determines our perception. Well, trust in other people is part of this construct. If someone you trust lies to you, it takes a lot of proof to change your mind. Once you find out about the lie, your trust, your certainty in that person, perhaps in everyone, is shaken. And that easy flow of information between your conscious and subconscious is disrupted. If your eyes start to play tricks on you, or you're fooled by a magician's sleight of hand, you start to mistrust your expectations, and your mental model building becomes suspended until something predictable starts happening again. The common factor among all this is the interplay between the conscious and the subconscious mind. The problem occurs when we stop requiring our minds to match reality and hold on to a belief regardless of demonstrable outcomes. How is it that cult members remain under the watchful eye of leadership, regardless of the published reports of actions those leaders have taken to swindle the followers' money for its own uses? How is it that a battered woman stays with an abusive husband? How is it that a religious believer dismisses contrary evidence to their particular belief system? It's a spectrum, of course, but the fundamental circumstance is an interplay between the conscious and subconscious mind. Once the subconscious mind accepts an input from the conscious as real, it is. It's as real as cutting your finger. Once a chain of identity has defined one's self, it becomes a mandate, as important as sex, food, or shelter. This same simple mechanism is at work behind everything. Understanding this, how can we benefit from it? First of all, consider all the people in your local community. All those people are defined by various chains of identity. Those chains have real value relative to the domes that those people live within. When a person talks to you, you can see behind their words and actions and understand where those words and actions come from. Rather than allowing others to influence our own reality, we can recognize the why behind the what. understand the simple mechanisms dictating a person's certainty and beliefs, we can float above such things and be uninfluenced. No matter how fantastic or mundane the claim or promise, no matter how attractive the advertising, we can remain stoic and unmoved, simply observant. We can also benefit by understanding ourselves. We have the tools now to return to zero, question our own certainties, and live in reality, free from lies and manipulations. We're now able to overcome our own biases and backgrounds. You can now question your current motivations and be true to yourself. The path of a MGTOW is groundbreaking and separate from common man. The motives of the majority are no longer your own. But what guides you? What defines your direction? Certainly not that which you walked away from. How do you start over and follow this new and untrodden path? You must understand yourself, without that comforting reference so common to everyone else. You now have very little in common with your society. What do? To thine own self be true, of course. But how can you be true to a self you don't understand? This is the first step in breaking the cycle of perpetual mental slavery. Understand what you're doing and why. Rewrite what was already written and walk a path for a reason you yourself wrote with purpose and intention. But where do you start? You must return to zero and break the chains of identity that define you. Those success objectives are the very things you're currently walking away from. But what are you walking toward? Why are you walking toward it? Answer these questions. That is your task now. To understand yourself at a deep level is the first step on your journey into the wilderness. Welcome to reality. There is no map or instruction manual. Inside the domes is certainty and meaning. Out in the wilderness, it's an empty canvas. Paint your life with colors you didn't know existed until you stepped out of societal indoctrination. Now that you've chosen to walk away and erased your predefined identity, you can learn to walk again without the crutch of common sense, the common wisdom of the collective. It's not easy. Everything tells you you're doing it wrong. Cut those connections to your old life, and the common wisdom of crowds will become a foreign concept, something to be distrusted until proven otherwise. I awoke before sunrise and made my way back to the Overlook, drinking a Red Bull. Strangely, the air and temperature were almost identical to the previous evening. A few tourists were there, one family, a few couples. One or two older groups were there, cameras ready to capture the sight of the earth spinning the sun into view. I stood there in my original spot, watching the ravens play on the wind as it forced its way out of the canyon with a deep rushing sound. There was a fairly heavy low cloud line in the distance, and the sun gradually appeared with less shock than one might see on a clear day. As the light harshened, the canyon walls again appeared alive in a shape-shifting color change. It was magical to observe. The canyon deepened as shadows formed more starkly upon the rocks. You could finally make out the river, rushing far below in the distance. I stood there taking in the experience. My journey into my own mind, understanding the nature of the solid soul, understanding the interplay between the conscious and unconscious, it was an unforgettable moment. There was a peace and tranquility I felt. Ever since, I've not felt that rushing sense of dread to avoid consequence, nor a desire for anything in the normal way. Each part of my day that has a deadline has been a challenge, an adventure to try to make it happen, like shooting basketball rather than trying to appease a master. In the end, I look back on that day in quiet reverence. Life happens strangely, but in a way, it waits to be discovered without tricks or obfuscation. See it clearly and understand its nature without external influence, and inner peace will find you in the most unexpected time. My path is now set. I don't know where I'm going or where I'll end up, but I understand what I'm doing and why. Life is an adventure again, free of definition, but full of vibrant character. Today is the day of my birth and simultaneously the last moment before death. I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to gain. The past and future are here in the present. There's no looking forward or back. All that is and ever will be, for me at least, is right now. Thanks for listening.